Welcome everybody to our latest Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We're glad to have you. We already have over 300 people on the call. If you have colleagues that are trying to get in, we might have some difficulty if we go closer to 500. But this will be recorded, so it'll be available for people to listen to at a different setting, and we will definitely distribute. It'll be on our website, so easily reached, but we'll also put out the link so that people can circulate it and tap into it, so it's useful. So this has all been part of all of us working in a virtual world and really trying to address the COVID-19 crisis. I have to say, I'm hearing very, inspiring reports of the work that you all are doing out in the field. You are really on the front lines here, and you are really, really valuable. We are filling the gaps of where the system isn't working. We are helping people in crisis in a difficult time. We are kind of where we need to be. This is what our mission in our world is. And I really appreciate the fact that so many of you are stepping up and really trying to figure it out, even though you might be at home, you might be away from colleagues in the workplace. It looks like people have really made the extra effort to make this work. And I and many others are deeply proud of you. So let's do a quick review of what the plan is for today's call. We're going to do our legislative updates. Things are kind of slowly moving forward. We'll talk a little bit about the the service or communication channels, just a quick update on what we've got and how it'll work and what will happen in the future. And then we'll spend the entire call really on unemployment insurance. Really, this is, we think, kind of one of the really basic tools of our work. And maybe to sum it up, in this time of crisis, this is absolutely one of the most essential pieces that can help people get through this crisis. We'll explain a lot of detail about how the new changes in the availability of the federal legislation impacting people and who can qualify and for how much and who doesn't qualify, so you understand the ins and outs of it. And then we'll have, and that'll be Michelle Evermore from the National Employment Law Project, deeply knowledgeable about both unemployment law and this topic of what's happened with the new law. And then we'll have Casey Bromberg from Northeast Strategies. She has been a housing counselor. She has lots of experience in working in several states in unemployment issues, and she would be our kind of practical on the ground expert on what counselors should say, how to manage this, how to solve problems in a sometimes Byzantine system. And I think we'll give a kind of practitioner's perspective in a way that will be very helpful to us all. There'll be a chance to ask questions after each session, so use the chat box to communicate the questions, and Melody will field the questions after each speaker to give people a chance to get some of the answers done. We'll do a quick plug on NHRC membership. Thanks for you that all been renewing lately. And our next call will be on April 30th, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the call. So let's pivot quickly to the legislative updates. So Melody, what is happening out there on the Hill?
Thank you, Bruce. So, oh gosh, let me just backtrack and say that members of Congress and their staff have really been, given the nature of the pandemic, working in overdrive to provide aid to constituents and their communities and sort of really work hard to address this pandemic. So I just, am very grateful for them and their sacrifice right now. We were just finished with the previous stimulus when another stimulus had to be addressed. We're calling that stimulus 3.5. Its formal name is the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act, H.R. 266. That bill passed the Senate, and I believe is being debated now. Hopefully it comes to a vote and pass this evening or tomorrow. What this bill does is that it simply, I shouldn't say simply, it sort of funds a lot of the programs that were being exhausted in terms of funding, as well as expanding funding for different things, you can see on the screen. The primary part of it is an additional $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, which allows businesses to continue their payroll and keep employees on the books, as well as $60 billion for community banks and smaller lenders. The technical language around that is kind of wonky, as well as $25 billion for expanded testing for COVID-19. Ellie, next slide. Ellie, thank you. However, the nature of the job and how quickly things are moving on the Hill, these slides were finished last night around 6 p.m. and just 30 minutes ago we got new information, so forgive me for sort of shooting by the hip here. But essentially we were under belief, even as recent as yesterday, that Stimulus 4.0 would be very likely to follow the bill being debated now, and would be focused on aid for states and local governments, infrastructure development, an additional run of stimulus checks, as well as an additional mortgage and renter assistance. That's partially true. We got word from our partners on the Hill, primarily financial services, that the stimulus packages, as for right now moving forward, will be solely focused on COVID-19 pandemic response, and will be very unlikely to include infrastructure development. We anticipate that infrastructure development, things like expanding access to the internet, roads, bridges, housing issues, will be included in more recovery legislation. So once the pandemic is sort of at a close and we're trying to rebuild and we come out of our homes and say, what do we do next? That will likely include infrastructure. Infrastructure development is a huge priority of Chairwoman Waters. The Housing and Infrastructure Act she's been pushing very, very hard. It includes a lot of funding for different housing programs, community development block grants, disaster recovery, housing trust fund, and other programs. So that is not gone. It's just right now being put to the side temporarily while legislators address the pandemic. Ellie, next slide. Thank you. So what does that mean for housing counseling? Housing counseling is also a very big priority for Chairwoman Waters. We had great conversations with her staff in the last several months, but particularly now, given everything that's going on around the country, especially in COVID-19 hotspots like California, New York, New Jersey, here in Philadelphia, the notion of eviction counseling, foreclosure counseling, helping people with their mortgages, figuring out what programs, assistance programs that's available for them. Many people are confused. They are seeking out housing counselors. And so a renewed interest in housing counseling has definitely permeated the Hill. We're really excited about those conversations. And we know for a fact that Chairman Waters is going to be a huge advocate of ours on the Hill. She has been very vocal with advocates that she is supportive of increasing housing counseling exponentially in funding. And we are hearing similar things in appropriations, at least on the House side. On the Senate side, it's a little bit more nuanced, the conversation, primarily because appropriators are returning to their fiscal year 2021 conversations in the midst of the pandemic. So conversations around final numbers are a bit different. However, excuse you. However, we are working on getting Republican support in both chambers. Given the nature of the pandemic, people aren't returning to the Hill. They're all working from home. They're trying to get as much consensus as possible on legislative text prior to passage because they want to get everything done via voice vote. So bipartisan support of proposals is tenfold as important as it was before the pandemic. People that we're focusing on right now are Republicans in the House and Senate THUD subcommittees, as well as in financial services and banking. As soon as we get a little bit more support on that, we'll definitely share. But it is for now the usual suspects. If your legislator is represented in either of those committees, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to sort of coordinate ways we can encourage them to support housing counseling during this time. And for that, I'll turn it back over.
Thanks, Melody. And I will just echo that it has been very interesting that a lot of people in the House and Senate that we talk to are deeply aware of the counselor role and how valuable it was during the foreclosure crisis and how valuable it will be today. And I've had conversations with people at Treasury and CFPB as well, and they are on top of it. And it's interesting. We are seen as a vital link in this chain. I'm very glad that we're getting the recognition we are. Obviously, we need to convert that into some substantial support, but we're definitely part of the conversation on many levels. So good news there. So I think the one thing that we've rolled out in the last, why don't we switch the slides, please? We've rolled out the servicer contact list. So hopefully everybody has seen that. If not, feel free to reach out to us. We went out through the Leaders in Housing Counseling listserv. And there are 2 editions that have come out so far. So the most recent one has more up-to-date information on it, and we consolidated the Wells Fargo map into a link so that when it's changed, you'll have the most recent information. And we've got 17 of the largest servicers on that list. We don't have everybody, so if you have a relationship with a servicer and can get the information of what their consumer portals are and the also what the and what kind of counselor channels there are, we'd be happy to add them to the list. This is a really valuable. We expect it to be a living document that we will be updating regularly, and we want this to be useful to everybody. I'm sure you all noticed that it's password protected. You know, we agree, and several of the servicer lenders have said it's really important that we just keep the counselor channels exclusively for counselors so they don't get overwhelmed and we're able to have access to do the problem solving that you all are so good at. And we want to nurture and keep those going. So we'll keep those updated. Melody right now is working on trying to get some of this onto our website, and we will keep you informed. And that way we won't have to issue a new edition periodically as we add to it and as we improve the contact information. It'll always be updated on real time, and then that way we'd be able to you'd be able to access it whenever you needed it and find out who the latest contacts are. And if you've got any additions or corrections, anything of that nature, please reach out to Ellie. She's managing the directory itself. And that's one just quick shout out that we got very good assistance to assemble this list from the HUD Office of Housing Counseling. They were able to leverage the relationship with the FHA Servicing Center, and that gave us a lot of contacts. Hope Now and Housing Policy Council also have provided us with some contacts, and they will continue to do that with some of their servicers that they work with. And we obviously have some direct relationships with a number of servicers, and we're able to add their information as well. But we are absolutely looking for more, so if anything you can do to help us with that, that'd be great. And we're glad. We've heard pretty good reviews so far of it. Let us know if there's some thoughts you've got about how to improve it. So I think the main theme on today is really on unemployment insurance. Clearly, this is a critical issue here. And certainly if a counselor knows somebody has lost their income, has lost their job, that the first question should be, have you applied for unemployment insurance? And we'd like to use this session today to help give you the skills to be able to figure out what the best things are to do for people who have not applied, or people who have tried to apply and have not been successful for whatever reason. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie, who's done some work pulling all this together. Ellie.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is staying safe and that you are all well. Today we, as Bruce mentioned, we really wanted to focus on what's available under the CARES Act for unemployment insurance, thinking that this may be something really useful for counselors to assist their clients with around income and being able to pay mortgage and pay rent, and what's available and what are ways to best access it. So our first presenter today is Michelle Evermore. Michelle joined the National Employment Law Project in 2018 as a senior policy analyst for social insurance. She's worked to promote worker power as a legislative advocate for labor unions, including the Service Employees International Union District 1199 New England and National Nurses United. She's also worked for the Obama Department of Labor to advance sound benefits policy, employment policy for people with disabilities, and equal pay for equal work. Prior to that, she worked in Congress for a decade, primarily for Senator Tom Harkin and also for the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. In those roles, she worked to advance worker protections, organizing rights, and improving retirement security in a variety of private pension plan designs, as well as Social Security. So Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today. Take it away. We are not hearing you, Michelle, if you're speaking. There,
hello?
I hear you.
Okay,
you're on.
All right. Somehow my computer just crashed, like at the beginning of this call. I was having a panic attack. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. So what a lot of people don't realize is that when I worked for Senator Harkin, my other hat was doing housing policy. And so I'm just a huge fan of all your work. I just really appreciate everything you do. You make a huge difference in people's lives. So it's an honor to get to talk to you. So I just want to, before I get started really with all of the technicalities of legislation and before everybody's eyes glaze over, I want to answer the first question right now. The biggest question I'm getting is, this is my circumstance. I worked here for a little bit, I worked there for a little bit, I did this, I was something here. Should I apply for unemployment insurance? The answer is, no matter what those circumstances are, yes. The biggest reason people don't get unemployment insurance is because they don't apply. And the biggest reason they don't apply is because they don't think they qualify. Even people who've never qualified in the past will qualify for unemployment insurance now. So I'm going to explain to you how all that works. Next screen, please. So the first thing that Congress did right away, as soon as claims started increasing, like the very first week of March, started working on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That provided $1 billion for administration. Why is that important? Well, as you see now, that the state systems are overwhelmed, and we anticipated that. The problem is state administrative funding is based on last year's unemployment rate. And so states are at a record low level of funding, facing a record high level of need. And that is a real problem. So there's $1 billion for administration. The grants have now gone out. It'll take a little while to spend them and staff up, but money is moving to states, and that's an important takeaway there. The other thing is there were some hooks in that, and it encouraged states to increase what's called recipiency. That's the number of unemployed people receiving an unemployment benefit. Recipiency has been declining in the United States for the past decade because states exited the last recession without enough money in their trust funds, and they spent everything that they had and borrowed from the federal government. And then when taxes started to go up, there was huge pressure to cut benefits and cut access. So I'm sure that the population you serve are used to this horrible, broken system. A lot of the new benefits will definitely increase access and recipiency. So the system that you knew is not the system that's in place now. It's really important to keep that in mind. And there was also money tied to waiving some of the administrative hassles that people have. Work search what's called experience rating. So employers are charged more depending on how many of their employees take unemployment insurance benefits. And so that means that they often challenge claims. Well, now there's very little incentive for employers to challenge claims. And the other thing is, most states have this antiquated idea that you should wait a week before, after becoming unemployed, to qualifying for unemployment insurance benefits. Most states have waived the waiting week requirement in order to get this money. Next slide. So pandemic unemployment assistance. So the CARES Act included three major provisions. Pandemic unemployment assistance, which is fully federally funded. It lasts for 39 weeks, and it's based on disaster unemployment assistance, which we've had in place for a while, and states are used to administering. It's going to be a little bit, the benefit is a little bit new in the sense that there's a whole lot of new people who qualify. So people will qualify for the new pandemic unemployment assistance if they've been diagnosed with COVID-19, if a member of their household has been diagnosed, if the individual is providing care for a family member, if a child or other person in the household can't attend school or another facility that's closed as a direct result of the pandemic, that person will qualify. If the person just plain can't reach the place of employment because of a quarantine, they qualify. If a person has been advised to self-quarantine because of a medical condition, they'll qualify. If a person was scheduled to start employment, hasn't been working, but they were scheduled to start a job and they got a job offer and that offer was rescinded, if they can prove that to the agency, they qualify for this new benefit. If a person has become a breadwinner or major support for a household, after the head of household died, that person can get an unemployment insurance benefit now. If the individual has quit their job as a direct result of COVID-19, for example, they had COVID-19, they got over it, but they still have a lingering disability. That kind of person can qualify for benefits. And if the individual's place of employment has closed as a direct result of COVID-19, they should qualify. And if the individual meets any additional criteria established by the secretary. And so the additional criteria is basically specifically saying that ride sharing and gig economy workers are covered if they're not already covered under state unemployment insurance. Now, gig economy workers should qualify for state unemployment insurance, but unfortunately many states don't see it that way. So they'll at least get the pandemic unemployment assistance benefit until we get the underlying program figured out. The other thing is this applies to self-employed folks and independent contractors. So anybody who's, this is going to include people who are misclassified as independent contractors. And so this benefit is calculated exactly the same way that a regular state unemployment insurance benefit is calculated. But there's a minimum. So the minimum is that it's 50% of the average weekly benefit, which is about $190 nationally. Now there's challenges to administering this benefit because for regular W-2 employees, they can apply and their employer has been paying taxes on their behalf. And so the agency actually already has some information about them. Sorry, I need a drink of water, I'm getting dry. So there's challenges to administering it. The worker has to document for themselves what they've earned. So a number of different kinds of documentation may be accepted. I would advise anybody to keep anything that they have demonstrating what money they've earned and submit that. The other thing that's really important to this community is that monetary eligibility is waived. What does that mean? All you have to do is prove that you have some attachment to the workforce. And so anybody who's worked and can prove that they earned money, they no longer have to earn enough to qualify for unemployment insurance. So people who have earned very little money will get at least the minimum pandemic unemployment assistance benefit. And then there's the next benefit. Next slide. The next provision is pandemic unemployment compensation. That's $600 per week, and it's fully federally funded. It applies to anybody getting an unemployment insurance check, and it's backdated. So many states haven't started paying this out yet. It will be backdated to the last week of March. So when people finally get it, they'll get several weeks of benefits all at once. So anybody getting a regular unemployment insurance benefit, anybody who exhausted benefits but now qualifies for the new extended benefit, or anyone on that pandemic unemployment assistance program that I just talked about, anyone gets this extra $600 a week until July 31st. Next slide. And then finally, there's PEUC, which is Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, Emergency Unemployment Compensation. This is this 13-week extension of regular unemployment insurance, and I'm sure you're familiar with this sort of model. Every time there's a recession, Congress steps in and increases the number of weeks available. It's important to notice, though, that this is fully federally funded. Usually it's half state funded. So, you know, that also increases states' likelihood of, you know, it decreases states' desire to disqualify people for continuing eligibility reasons. And I think that that's important. All states, even states that have less than 26 weeks of benefits available now, will still get the 13 weeks of additional PEUC. This is also, again, fully federally funded. Next slide. So there's also a provision about short-time compensation, or what's colloquially referred to as work sharing. Work sharing is a tool for employers to manage layoffs to spread lost hours across the workforce. So, for example, my workload has gone down by 20 or 30 or 40%, and I wouldn't ordinarily lay off 20 or 30 or 40% of my workers so that they could go get a full unemployment insurance benefit. Employers now have the option of, in 27 states, instead of laying off 40% of workers, they can just spread that layoff across 40% of people's time. So then the person can get not just an unemployment insurance benefit, but once they get that unemployment insurance benefit, they also get the additional $600 a week. So this is a really strong incentive for employers to keep functioning and paying some amount of salary. And so I think it's very important that people know about this. There is money in the bill to publicize these provisions. Now, states that don't already have a work sharing benefit in place, they get some money if they get 50% funding. This is fully federally funded for the states that already have it. States that don't have it get 50% extra funding to run a program that conforms with the standards just temporarily through this recession, which, you know, people don't generally tend to take up work sharing outside of a recession. So, you know, that makes some sense. Next slide. There's a few miscellaneous provisions that are of interest. First, there's something called a non-reduction clause. So what happens is sometimes states, when they run out of trust fund dollars, they want to go cut benefits. This says that as long as a state has accepted all of this federal money, they can't cut their base benefit. The other thing is that waiting week that we talked about earlier, that's fully federally funded. And this is really important for a lot of the people that you serve, probably. Nonprofits sometimes take the option of not paying federal and state unemployment insurance, and instead say, if we lay anybody off, we'll pay for that benefit at that time. So they don't pay up front, they pay when somebody gets laid off. This bill says that they only have to pay 50% of it. It seemed impossible to completely let them off the hook, because it's kind of like, you know, getting in a car accident and then buying car insurance the next day, right? So they had to, you know, still have some level of liability, but this waives some of it, so it makes it a little bit easier for government entities and nonprofits. Next slide, please. So what isn't included, and I think that this is the important the really key important thing that we need to be working on going forward. There is nothing, there's nothing permanent in this legislation. Now, there really needs to be a massive overhaul of unemployment insurance federally, because as I said, the number of people receiving, the number of unemployed workers receiving unemployment insurance is at an all-time low, or it was going into this era. States have set up all kinds of administrative hurdles. They have reduced benefit duration. They've reduced benefits. They've just made it really painful for workers to get a check. In Florida, for example, in the first quarter of last year, only 8.3% of unemployed workers were getting a benefit. And what does that mean going into this recession? Well, the state's not set up to process claims. The state's set up to make it as hard as possible for people to get a benefit. And what we saw again in Florida is these really long lines for unemployment insurance. People couldn't get through to the system. So public libraries started handing out paper applications, and people were standing in line, not socially distanced, sorry, just to stand in line for a paper unemployment insurance application. So this is a huge problem. We need overall unemployment insurance reform, and nobody pays any attention to unemployment insurance during economic recoveries. When times are good, it's really easy for states to cut benefits and nobody really notices, nobody's organized. We need to start organizing around this. We need to start amplifying the frustration and rage that people are feeling at being left out of this system. States will need additional administrative funding also. That $1 billion seemed like a lot first week of March. It's not. States are still having trouble processing. The good thing is state UI directors knew that a recession was coming, and many of them have developed plans. Now, nobody ever expected COVID-19. Nobody ever expected that we would have 20% unemployment within a month, but here we are. So it's amazing to me that states are still processing benefits. They're still up and running. States had these emergency plans in place to start pulling people over from other agencies. For example, you know, most states, the tourism agency is not that busy right now, so they can handle the capacity. So people should start getting benefits. What we saw in today's initial claims numbers is that, you know, a couple weeks ago, we were seeing 6.6 million new claims a week. And since we knew that people weren't getting through, to me, that was a measure of the capacity of the system, not a measure of however many people were losing work. But we've been seeing decreasing initial claims, which means states were able to process more. They're getting through their backlog, and they're starting to process benefits for everyone. Now we're seeing waiting periods to get those benefits of 4, maybe 5 weeks, and that's a real hardship. States are rushing to try and fix that lag. One important point about unemployment insurance is that getting benefits out when due is a hugely important thing under the Social Security Act. And states are penalized if they don't pay benefits within 2 to 3 weeks. And so there is a real, no matter which state, there's real pressure to pay benefits on time. And states are getting back to that standard, but it was something nobody could expect, and it took a long time. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Melody, do we have questions for Michelle?
We have a lot of questions. I'm going to try and bundle some of these because a lot of people are asking similar things. So thank you so much for doing this. Obviously, I just wanted to tell the presentation that we have maxed out. We are a full house. Let's start with unemployment. Not unemployment, excuse me, redundant, self-employment. Those who are self-employed who aren't working, are they able to apply, and are there any complications around that for this demographic? a lot of people are complaining that they were unable to do it, or they weren't sure on guidance.
Yes. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. I'm trying to use my headphones so that I don't cause feedback. The headphones weren't working earlier. Can you hear me now?
No worries.
Oh, we're not hearing you.
We sure aren't.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. I guess I just can't use my headset. I'm sorry if there's a little bit of reverb. States can, so people who are self-employed, PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, was set up specifically with this group of people in mind, basically. Disaster Unemployment Assistance is what it was based on. And that kicks in whenever there's like a hurricane or a flood, and people who ordinarily wouldn't qualify for unemployment insurance are considered to be unemployed through no fault of their own. So it's very hard to make the case that a self-employed person fired themselves. So they're generally not qualified for regular unemployment insurance. But if you're genuinely self-employed now, pandemic unemployment insurance was structured for you. Now, it is a little bit harder to get this benefit because it is structured differently. You'll have to provide a 1099 probably, or however it is that you know how you make money to the agency. And I would encourage anybody who's self-employed to put together as thorough a portfolio of earnings as possible, because some states base the benefit on a high quarter of earnings rather than earnings throughout the year. So you want to establish that the highest quarter of earnings that you have to get the highest possible weekly benefit.
Okay. Thank you. Around President Trump's announcement of suspending applications for immigrants to enter the country, an immigrant who was on a work permit that expired, would they be able to still apply for this?
Oh, that's a good
expired or pending.
Yeah, as long as their earnings were earned while they had work authorization, I would apply. I'm not entirely sure that the agency will pay out a benefit, but I would absolutely try to make the case that these earnings were earned while work authorized, because work authorized folks should all qualify. This is an earned benefit.
Thank you. A lot of people are asking about timeline. So several people applied early March and they still haven't received anything, and they're unable to reach a live person when they're asking for questions about their application. Do you just have a few words to speak to on that?
My best advice is to be patient. Also, states are starting to expand the number of hours that their call centers are open, so call during off hours if at all possible. The other thing is, so some states actually, their computer systems are only open during business hours for some reason. States have been expanding those hours as well that people can use to get through on the computer. I would definitely recommend trying to file online. Oh, another very, very, very important thing that I should get to really quickly, save your password. Do not lose your password, no matter what happens. If you have to like tape it in 5 places on your wall, do it, because if you need to reset your password, you first have to call through to these overwhelmed lines, and then they have to manually reset it for you, and they may actually, in some states, mail you a new password. So absolutely try to go through the online process, but keep your password. Be very careful about that.
Thank you. This is a more complicated question, but I understand it. Essentially, they're hearing from some people that their employers have received the Paycheck Protection Program for the payroll and have recalled some employees back to work, but those employees are making more money on unemployment and are refusing work. Can this be reported, or will they lose their unemployment?
Yeah, unfortunately, if you're offered a suitable replacement for your old job, you have to take it. With a few caveats. If it's an incredibly unsafe environment, talk to your management about it, and report it. And if you can't get resolution that way, then in a lot of states you have what's called a good cause quit over health and safety reasons. The other thing is, if you qualify for pandemic unemployment assistance for any reason, because for any of those reasons that I listed that people can get a pandemic benefit, then you can still claim pandemic unemployment benefits based on that. So if you're immunocompromised or have a health condition, or you're self-quarantining with someone who has COVID-19, or any of those qualifying things will qualify you, or you have the caregiving exemption. So if you're caring for a small child or a loved one with COVID, or any other caregiving responsibility that you have now that you didn't have before COVID-19, you can also still collect the pandemic unemployment assistance.
Thank you. What happens after July 31st if individuals are still without employment or this pandemic continues? Will these programs be extended?
Yeah, so the July 31st deadline is only for the $600 additional benefit. The rest of the benefits, the pandemic unemployment assistance and regular unemployment extension, those all go to December 31. And I'm sure Congress will extend benefits again if we get to December 31 and this pandemic isn't starting to resolve. I have a feeling that there's going to be probably a little bit longer term of a recession. And this is another point I want to make about returning to work. If your job opens up and you can return to work, even though you're going to lose out on a couple months of the extra $600 pandemic benefit, it's probably a lot better to go and take that job, provided that it's safe, than it is to get the extra $600 for a few months, because jobs aren't going to be, jobs may not come back. So if your job came back, I'd strongly recommend taking it, even if you're losing a little money right now.
Thank you. Graduate students who graduate but they're employed by their universities and then now cannot find employment due to hiring freezes, are they eligible for these programs?
That's still a point that we're not entirely clear on, and we haven't gotten clarity from the Employment and Training Administration interpreting the new law. It wasn't made explicit in the new law. Usually full-time students are considered to be full-time students, and that's their job. And so any other job doesn't necessarily qualify them for unemployment insurance. But I would make the case, and in many states I'm sure they'll be processing claims this way. I would make the case that this is a person who had workforce attachment, was exiting training to get additional workforce attachment, and is simply unavailable, is simply unable to right now. Again, this is one of those questions where it's not necessarily clear to me that somebody would qualify, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't apply.
Thank you. How do these various unemployment and pandemic benefits affect eligibility for other state benefits such as Medicaid?
Medicaid is specifically not affected by the $600 pandemic benefit or the pandemic unemployment assistance.
Thank you. Could you speak to a bit about qualifications or eligibility for those whose hours have been reduced? So if one employer originally had their staff working at 40 hours a week and then reduced them to 80% of work time, would they be able to qualify? Would they get a reduced benefit? How would that work?
Yeah, there's something called partial unemployment insurance that's available in every state. The laws vary by state, but basically it's usually a factor of how much you're earning now versus how much your weekly benefit amount would be. So if you would be entitled to a $400 weekly benefit and you're only earning $300 at your new job, you qualify for partial, with your new hours, you qualify for partial unemployment insurance. And then with that would come the extra $600.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting tons of questions coming in now about this. and I'm going to try to parse it out. So there's this new sort of term called the gig economy, and people are working let's say one W-2 job and then 2 or 3 different side jobs. So let's say one of those jobs, they can't return to it, but the other 2 they're still able to do. How would that affect or change their eligibility for these various assistance programs?
So that would still qualify a person generally for partial UI as long as they meet the income requirements for partial UI. Just apply for the benefit, and then every week states require you to recertify. And whenever the person recertifies, just let them know how much you made. Be as accurate as possible because you want to avoid an overpayment. That those people should qualify. Now, in the case that a person had one part-time job that would qualify for UI, but they're making a lot of money as an independent contractor, it might make sense for them to go to use the independent contractor money to apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. State agencies are gonna view this differently, but if not enough money was earned to qualify for UI in one of the part-time jobs, then that would automatically throw them over the wall into pandemic unemployment assistance.
Thank you. If someone decides to quit their job to care for a relative who might be sick because of COVID-19 or not be a risk to those people, would they still be able to collect the full benefit?
My understanding is yes. That was a point that was really unclear in the guidance, but there was some correspondence back and forth between the chair of Senate Finance and the Employment and Training Administration. And basically, if you going to work jeopardizes somebody that you're caring for who has a health condition, that should qualify you for pandemic unemployment assistance. But check with your state agency to make sure. States are interpreting these laws a little bit differently in every state, so don't quit until you're sure.
Thank you. Could you tell people the list of the 27 states that are doing the work sharing?
Yes, I have that. Let me see.
One of the things that you can do, Michelle, is send that to me. This is Ellie, and I can put it out when I send out the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint. I can include links like that you think are useful for people. So in particular, what are the list of states that are doing the shared work?
Sounds good. I'll do that. Thank you. Can a person apply for both unemployment insurance benefits and be a part of the PPP program?
No.
And if so, do you have to pay one back?
Yeah, you can't collect from both PPP and UI. PPP is intended to be a payroll pass-through, and yeah, there's been a lot of news this morning as people realize that if their employer applied for PPP, they may be eligible for actually more in unemployment insurance, but they have to take the pay from their regular job.
Thank you. And sole proprietors are eligible for PPP, correct?
Yes.
Let me see. There's just really so many. If someone worked for part of 2019 but wasn't working when COVID-19 hit, do they qualify for these benefits?
Yes. So this falls under the monetary eligibility issue. As long as somebody can prove that they had attachment to the workforce in the last year and now they can't get work because of COVID-19, but they'd really like to work, they can apply for pandemic unemployment assistance with whatever income they happen to have. The other thing is if they lost work in 2019 and if they exhausted regular unemployment insurance benefits anytime before last July, they're still eligible for the extended benefits.
Thank you. A few people have asked that they're hearing about people who are rejected or questioning their eligibility for PPP because of their number of employees. So in those situations where people are rejected, what are their additional options? Who can
You
they
know,
appeal to, basically?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about PPP because I've been spending so much time on unemployment insurance. But I would say UI is always there.
Thank you. Will any of these assistance benefits be taxed at the federal or state level?
Yes, you know, most states allow you to, when you apply for unemployment insurance, have the tax come out of every weekly benefit check. Not every state does that. So if you don't get taxed up front, save some of your benefit because you're going to be taxed on that next year. You'll get a 1099-G like you get when you get a federal refund or a state refund.
Thank you. I think you said you were going to send us a list. I think that's everything. Yes. That covers most of the questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for taking time out of your busy day to talk with us. I know that people really welcome the information that you just provided today. And one of the things I think that I heard pretty loud and clear is no matter what, just go ahead and apply.
That's exactly right. Don't make a self-assessment. That is the biggest problem, and especially for people who don't make a lot of money, people without a high school education, they tend to decide for themselves that they either wouldn't be eligible or that they'd be criminalized for taking the benefit. That's not true. This is an earned benefit. People have every right to apply.
Great. All right. So thanks again, Michelle. And we are now going to move on to Casey Bromberg, who is with Northeast Strategies. Casey previously worked as a housing counseling program manager, including managing the infamous EHLP program for the, oh my, my Siri on my phone thinks I'm talking to it, for the entire state of Maine, and left her position in 2016 to work for the Maine Department of Labor's Unemployment Insurance Compensation Bureau as a trainer for the division. She has expertise in how the computer systems and policies work for Maine, Mississippi, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, since the states formed a consortium and aligned their laws and systems. She trained the staff on how the unemployment system works, as well as the actual software. There's a lot of tricks to unemployment and backdoors that counselors can access without, in most cases, sending someone to a physical office for assistance. There are also a lot of misconceptions that clients have about unemployment insurance, and Casey went back into the housing counseling world out of the frustration with how unemployment insurance wasn't working for most people in Maine. So Casey, welcome, and thank you. I want to say Casey reached out to us when we put out a call for some experts to help us out with this webinar. And so Casey stepped forward and volunteered, and we're really happy to have her. Casey, take it away.
Thank you very much, Ellie. And thanks to Michelle, too. I learned a lot on hers about CARES because there's a lot of ins and outs to that, too, as how that's moving forward. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is some key terms, some things that your clients will hear about, especially if they get a denial of benefits. We'll talk a little bit about the process of UI and how it actually works, because just like how you have your flow chart for foreclosure prevention, there's a flow chart for UI. We'll go through some background FAQs on how UI works. Well, then we're going to talk about how the errors happen. And then what to do for escalations and the action items for working with clients, which they refer to as claimants. So if you hear me use the word claimant, it's your client. So one of the things that you'll hear a lot in the unemployment world is able and available. And these are boxes that your clients want to make sure that they check off on the application. Even if there's a COVID-19 situation, right now the way the software is designed, it's designed for the old system. So if they check off that they're not able and available, it will trigger a hearing. So able and available essentially just means that you're able to work and you're available for work. So they always want to make sure that their applications state that they are able and available for work. So as I said, that could kick it to adjudication, which is the hearing. As Michelle kind of alluded to earlier, there's a base period, which means that it's the last calendar year plus an additional quarter that they look at to see which has the most money in it to try and get you the best benefit. So that's your benefit year, is when you're actually paid out the benefit. Covered employment is something that we used to worry a lot about. It won't be so much of an issue under CARES, but it still is an issue about who's considered an employee and who's not considered an employee. And that could be a way that some employers try to get out of paying for the charges. As Michelle said, there's some incentives around that. But others are not necessarily. There's still always going to be people who will try to get out of paying unemployment taxes. An interstate claim is just that, when you hear that somebody works in one state but resides in another. So that can complicate their claim a little bit. To actually be unemployed, that definition is changing with CARES. But essentially it means that you are out of work through no fault of your own. So that's where CARES comes in now, with the no fault of your own piece. A voluntary quit is something that you don't want to have on your application. So that means having left work through a choice of your own. If there's anything that references that on the application, it won't go through. So this is a chart that came out from New York State DOL. There's other agencies that have been putting out a similar chart as well. So if you have somebody that's already in the pipeline, somebody who's been approved for UI, and they have already been getting benefits because they were unemployed before COVID-19, they can, all they have to do is just continue to certify weekly, and then they'll start to get that $600 a week as soon as that kicks in. Then you've got people who are eligible for UI and the not traditionally eligible. They're encouraging everyone to apply. So this is where the self-employed folks start to come in, because they want self-employed people to apply, but it's not open yet. That's one thing that a lot of states are grappling with right now, is that the code literally is not written in the software for PEUC. So what they have to do right now is, you may see it where a lot of states like Florida have gone to paper applications, but they haven't gotten all the regulations yet from the feds to be able to determine how the code needs to be written for what documentation needs to be submitted. So it's not as simple as when you do a loan modification and you've got the list from the servicer, that list isn't out yet. And then you've got the people who exhausted UI benefits last year. They are again eligible for UI this year, and they should be applying for benefits. Can you go to the next slide, Ellie? Okay, so in a clean claim, that's one that has no complications or errors. So a person does everything right, or thinks they do. You have the claimant that files for their claim, and then off to the side, there's that monetary determination that Michelle mentioned, which determines how much money that they're going to get for a weekly benefit, and how much money they can get overall. Then there's a certification process where both the claimant has to certify and the state has to certify that they actually were unemployed through no fault of their own. Then there's a determination, or sometimes a redetermination if there's any complications to the claim. And then the client actually gets their benefits. So that's kind of in a nutshell, but there's more to it than that. So every state has authorized who can apply for UI benefits a little bit differently. So as I said before, the self-employed individuals under CARES, they can collect the PUA benefits, but that's not been rolled out yet. And when people talk about having paid into the UI system, it means that their employer has paid in. So when self-employed individuals have not paid into the system, so there's no money there for them to collect. So that's one reason why PUA is in place, because they actually have no money to pay for them at the moment. What we know about the documentation that will be needed is tax returns from 2018 and 2019 if they've been filed. That's what most states are promoting on their websites at the moment. Can we go to the next slide, please? We know that a person normally in most states can collect benefits for 26 weeks, and they're going to get an additional 13 weeks beyond that initial 26 under CARES. Next slide, please. So how much can the person collect? Every state evaluates the maximum amount a wage earner can collect for a weekly benefit once per year. So it's based off of whatever the highest average weekly wage was in the state that previous year. So like in the state of Maine, where I'm from, it's $458 a week. So that $600 a week means a whole lot to people in states with lower weekly benefits. The money was released on 4/16, that at $600, and it goes retroactive to the week beginning 4/4. It's always important to know that when a week begins, it usually begins on a Sunday in most states, so, or a Saturday. It depends on how they run their week. But it's important to know what day to file, because the faster you file in the earlier in the week, the earlier you get your money if you have a clean claim. And those funds are going to continue through July. Next slide, please. So how quickly does someone get their money? The waiting week is still in place in some states. Most of them have gotten rid of it because they don't get their federal money if they don't waive the waiting week. With a normal claim, it still is going to take 2 weeks or more for those benefits to be reviewed, because what happens is there has to be time for the state to verify that someone was actually unemployed. So they'll send out a form to the employer, and the employer has 10 business days to respond saying that they have laid the person off. So under this COVID-19 situation, a lot of states are not waiting as long for the employer response to come in. But if it's somebody that's never filed before, there could be an issue with that. And then one other point that I want to make sure that you mention to your clients is this direct deposit versus the benefit card. So most states use a benefit card system to load the benefits onto a debit card for a claimant. Unless the claimant specifically chooses to do direct deposit into their bank account, the benefits will be loaded onto the benefit card. So what we need to do is advise clients to do direct deposit, which may mean that they have to figure out where on the computer system they get to put in their direct deposit information. It's not always an obvious place, but it's crucial that they get it onto the direct deposit as opposed to the benefit card. If they're unbanked, the benefit card is obviously the best way to go. But if they have a bank account, we want it to go into their bank account, because if there's any issues with the money being loaded on the cards, then it creates a problem with the servicer of the card. The state has nothing to do with it. So you actually have to call the bank that's administering the card. As crazy as that sounds. Next slide, please. So what if something's abnormal? I talked a lot about it being a normal claim or a clean claim. what happens is it's always going to be kicked to a fact-finding interview with a state-level adjudicator. And the adjudicator almost always has to contact the employer. And one thing about these appointments is that it has to be kept with an adjudicator. They're typically done by phone. Sometimes they'll be done by email with a request for information if it looks like something simple that needs to be done. But it's critical that the appointments are kept because, like, for instance, I was telling Ellie this the other day. I had a friend who called the unemployment line 400 times. She showed it to me on her phone that she called 400 times and couldn't get through to a real person. Eventually she did, and she was told that her claim was being held up because she had worked for 3 separate employers the previous year. And so she has to wait for her adjudication hearing, which is not happening until May 14th. So she won't see a penny of unemployment benefits until after that adjudicator makes their decision. So sometime after May. So if those appointments are missed or information is not submitted to the adjudicators, it will delay potential payments if the claimant is eligible. So if those appointments are missed, they really need to go, they're really at the mercy of the adjudicator's schedule and when the adjudicator can get back to them. So common claim errors. The software systems are not a lot of user friendliness in most states. So the very first thing that can happen is that the name can be mismatched with the Social Security Administration. Because when the claimant puts in their name to be able to begin their account creation, it automatically runs it against Social Security's website, and whatever their name is with Social Security, if it's a match, then they can create an account. So there are some folks that can't even create an account, or if they create an account under the wrong name, misspell their name for some reason, have an issue with a married name versus having gotten a divorce and not changed the name yet, something like that. Those are all potential areas where they could not get paid. And then it would go into a hearing process to find out what was wrong. They would have to submit documents to prove who they were. There's also issues if they have a typo on their Social Security number. That's a common error where somebody might transpose the last few digits of their Social Security number. Another thing that happens is when you go on to file your claim, it's always going to present you with an option for whoever was your last employer. But some folks, like if they're hired by a franchise, for instance, like I've done some work for with soft skills training for a Wendy's franchise, and it's Restwend, Maine. If that pops up and they don't know that it's Restwend, Maine on their paycheck, they could go and type in, no, I worked for Wendy's. And then that would delay their payments as well, because they would have chosen the wrong employer. A lot of people think that their claim is done. The claim is not done until they get the monetary determination. So they should have as much information as they possibly can available to them during that process of completing the claim, because if there is missing information, then it again will delay the claim. So if there's something that has been an error, can it be fixed by the claimant? Not usually, because once it's in the system, that's how it lives in the system, and typically the claimant is either going to get notified by the department saying that there was an error, or they have to notify the department themselves saying, for some reason the system has locked me out and I don't know why. once you get a real person involved, it can be resolved really quickly. It's not something that takes weeks to do. It's something that simply is a quick fix in the computer systems. But that's getting a real person involved. So next slide, please. So how do we get a real person involved? So you want to contact the general 800 number, but my preference is to contact the email to start with, because the emails all create a record, and you don't necessarily need to email 100 times to try and get someone through, because the way that it typically works is that the emails go into a queue, and then it is resolved in the order it was received. So if you add to the queue, you're not only delaying your potential issue getting resolved, you're delaying other people's issue getting resolved as well. But you document those attempts. If there's no response, this is how I respond to this. If it takes more than a week, let's say, for this to get resolved, because every day that it's not resolved is a day that the claimant isn't getting their initial benefit or that PEUC benefit. But talking with your governor's office, there are always people who do constituent services within the governor's office. That's what you want to talk to, because in these cases, the squeaky wheel is sometimes the one that rises to the top. The labor commissioner's office also has a person who does constituent services directly, and the UI division director. If you can't get anyone through any of those channels, talk to your state legislators. They all have direct lines to those deputy commissioners who work with constituent services in your state, and they're able to get that issue escalated as quickly as possible. You may need to do a TPA with your client if you're going to be the one that's helping them with this, because they're not going to give you the information. It's not as easy as it is sometimes with foreclosure. So when we want to work with clients initially, we want to make sure we understand what's needed and required for information. Typically, an employment history is helpful. We want to watch for potential errors, making sure that they're not putting in any typos or the wrong names or things like that. We want to document attempts to contact officials, because that's going to help you along the way, just like it does with foreclosure prevention. So if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you. I know we probably have some questions here in the queue, but I'm more than happy to help you if there's other questions that pop up that are state specific.
Thanks so much, Casey. Melody, do we have some questions for Casey?
Yes, we do. We have several. And I just want to remind people on the call that the recording will be available on our website, hopefully tomorrow morning, if not tomorrow afternoon. So you will have a copy of this presentation. If someone is working and collecting regular Social Security, if someone is collecting regular Social Security while working, but lost working income due to the pandemic, are they still eligible?
Yes. They have to report the Social Security as income, just like Michelle was talking about earlier, that if you have another job or another source of income, same if that someone's getting a pension or some other form of income. Typically, TANF is not counted as income, and that's a common mistake that people make, is reporting the wrong type of income. But there's usually a list.
Could you just spell out what TANF is, just in case people don't know what that means?
Oh, sure. It's the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. A lot of times people call it welfare.
Thank you. Is there a website where people can go to see the max benefit per state?
It should be available on the State Department of Labor's website. If you go to the unemployment insurance section, it should be able to tell you that information.
Thank you. And will it be able to show people like the fees associated and so forth?
There shouldn't be any fees associated with applying. And anything that, if they do hear of any people who are charging to help file, that would be price gouging under COVID-19.
Thank you. Those who do not have Social Security, those who have ITIN numbers, will they be able to receive benefits?
Yes, because it works the same as a Social Security number. And this is probably a good time to mention that if you need an interpreter, because somebody's from another country or doesn't have English as a first language, they also use a language line just like counselors do. So if it is somebody who's using an immigrant number or something like that, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you. If there's a delay in the payout of benefits, will payments be backdated?
Absolutely. They are backdated, but that doesn't help somebody while they're waiting for that money to come in.
Thank you. A person who is self-employed who has filed for unemployment, when will their claim be reviewed, considering most states have not coded their software for PUA?
That's hard to say. It would be a state-by-state decision. I would start watching the social media of the Department of Labor in that particular state to see when they're going to open it up. Most of them are actively tweeting about those types of things now. But it really is something that that person may even receive a denial initially if they've applied and the system isn't open yet.
Thank you. What if a person has exhausted their UI benefits last year? Will they be able to receive benefits at this time?
Yes. And they would be able to get the $600 a week.
And for those who are receiving Social Security benefits, are they still able to claim UI and other benefits related to the pandemic?
Only if they are working a job and receiving Social Security.
Okay, is there a specific kind of job or just any job?
They could be self-employed. And when that opens up, they can do it under that. It really is dependent on, they really do have to have something that's a wage earning job.
Okay, thank you. If a person has been self-employed and they haven't filed taxes in 2 years, would that be a problem for eligibility?
Just like in foreclosure, it's going to be a problem for eligibility. They may be able to get away with a profit and loss. It depends on what the requirements come out from the federal government for.
Okay. What if someone was previously the breadwinner that was laid off? Are they now able to receive benefits?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, if someone has additional questions that they need to have answered, given that there's so much congestion in unemployment support lines, are there other pipelines people can get information from?
I would start with your state legislator first in that case, because they, as I mentioned before, they have a direct line to constituent services, and they should be able to get questions answered more quickly.
Thank you. Some people are saying that they're hearing people were denied unemployment because they do not have enough periods paid in to qualify. What do counselors tell those people?
They should be having a hearing, and that should be something that they can review, because as Michelle was saying, that there have been some changes to how they're looking at the quarters. But it may be that they don't get to collect benefits at this time.
Thank you. So could you please explain all the types of employment that would qualify for these benefits? So there's full-time, part-time, seasonal, contract, gig economy. Could you just walk through which ones would and wouldn't qualify? Because we're getting so many questions.
Sure. Full-time covered employment qualifies. So you've been working a full-time job and you have been laid off from that job. Self-employment, meaning that you're an independent contractor, sole proprietor, something like that, you're able to qualify for UI as well. Part-time unemployment, it happens because if you have reduced hours, or you only worked part-time to begin with, that would qualify you for UI. Am I missing any yet, Melody?
Did you cover seasonal?
No, I did not cover seasonal. Thank you. Seasonal employment, we haven't seen a ton of that yet, because it works a little differently in different states. But typically what happens is with seasonal employment is they have to have worked at least 26 weeks in the previous year to begin with. So if they have worked that amount, they most likely will qualify.
Thank you. Back to the Social Security number, because this is a bit complicated. What if someone works using a Social Security number but files their taxes as an ITIN? Would they still qualify?
They would qualify. The question is which number would be used. My guess is that they would use the number that they worked under. So if they worked under the Social Security number, that would be the one that would trigger showing which employer they're working for.
I see. Thank you. How can someone prevent overpayment? If a claim was filed online, they only ask for pay information from your main profession, but not from the part-time job for the part-time jobs that offer partial benefits, even when both employers are listed.
They should be asking for the amount of compensation from all the employers, but if they're not, that's something that I would have a conversation with a real person about, if you can get through to one, or send an email to the state's general email box and just ask that question about where, because there may be something where they're missing something in the application or the weekly certification saying where's the compensation coming from.
Thank you. I've heard this actually in the news as well, but this just came up as a question. For employers that are asking its employees to use all of its sick leave and vacation time before they apply or qualify for UI, have you heard anything about that, and could you speak to it?
It is possible. It kind of depends on how the state is set up with what they consider a layoff to be, because oftentimes employees are compensated for their at least vacation time or PTO prior to being laid off. So it could be that the employer is trying to get them to use that time first before, so they keep them at their normal wage before laying them off. So it really depends on the state in that case. I know that's not a great answer, but that's the best I can do at this point.
Thank you. People are using, I'm getting an echo. Okay. Would gig work people qualify under seasonal? Is there a specific labor definition for that term?
Yes, each state defines seasonal workers a little bit different, as well as defining the seasons differently. So like in Maine, where I'm from, there's a certain season just for blueberries and people who rake blueberries. So people who work during that particular season are able to apply once that particular season is over with. So when they get laid off after having raked the blueberries in that particular season, they're able to apply after a certain date, as long as they worked enough during the season. So I would check what your state's regulations are on that.
Okay.
Because it does vary a little bit by season, by profession.
Okay. What if people are working full-time one week and then they're off next week? How would they, should they apply? I assume that answer would be yes. And how would they be categorized?
They most likely would be categorized as a full-time employee if they were working full-time. I can't think of why they really wouldn't without more information.
Thank you. Ellie, could you just give me a time check and let me know if we still have time for additional questions?
Well, it's 20 minutes to 3, so that, you know, if people want to continue to have questions answered, I would say that we certainly have some time. As long as
Okay, great. Thank you for
remains, as long as Casey remains available.
Yes, I'm happy to help.
Yes. Could you explain the state benefits for those who are undocumented, if at all?
I'm not as familiar with that. They do have to have some kind of an ITN or social security number in order to apply for benefits.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was a funny comment. Once someone gets goes back to work and gets sick, can they reapply for benefits?
Yes, if they don't exhaust benefits within the year, they can continue to apply for benefits, especially because of the 13-week extension. So if you get sick, go and leave work and then go back to work and then become unemployed again for some reason, as long as you haven't exhausted your benefits for the year, you'll get that extension.
Do you know approximately how long self-employed people will have to wait in order to apply for benefits?
Not at the moment. No, that's going to be a state-by-state issue.
Is there a chance that people could miss out on the $600 per week?
Nope, because it'll go retroactive once they apply for benefits.
Thank you. Is there an email address to send unemployment questions to?
There is one for each state. They're usually printed right on the Department of Labor's website for unemployment insurance. So it varies by state, what the email address is, but there are some out there.
Thank you. So one person's concern is around seniors, given that they aren't as computer literate as some younger generations who use computers and cell phones and all the like. How are seniors who are unable or unsure to get benefits, how would they be able to reach out to people? They may not have internet, they may have a cell phone. What are their avenues?
Their avenues are probably to try and get through on the 800 numbers to file a claim by phone. Once they get through the initial claim, they're able to do the weekly certifications by phone in most cases, through the IVR systems. And it's just a matter of getting through to that first time if they don't have internet access. Or there always is the option of a paper claim, but those are harder to get a hold of in some states. Some states have done away with them completely. But other states are, like Florida, are embracing them now.
Thank you. Can the amount you collect from UI and or PUA exceed the total amount you could have earned if working?
Yes, that's one of the big criticisms at the moment, is that some people are earning more on unemployment than they were prior to being laid off.
Okay. Do you think there's, excuse me, for the 600, is there a different application process or is it all together?
No, it's all together. So when somebody applies, it will be retroactively applied to the account. So they should start to see the benefit, hopefully in their direct deposit, as long as they've done direct deposit, or on that benefit card, if they chose to use the benefit card.
Oh, child, bless me. Next question. If a client is currently on unemployment from a claim in fall 2019 that's set to expire soon, will they have to reapply? Will the so-called expiration date just continue?
They should be able to continue because of the 13-week extension.
Okay, thank you. So someone who may be undocumented but use an ITIN, would they qualify for the state benefit or just federal?
They should be able to qualify for state benefits as well.
Thank you. I think, oh, excuse me, one question just popped up. If a client received the benefit card, does that mean they got approved?
Yes, typically it means that they've been approved for benefits, or that they can be approved for benefits. So it doesn't mean that the money comes on the card right then and there. It's going to be loaded each week by a direct deposit onto the card. So like in our state, when you apply, you automatically get the card in the mail. But it doesn't mean that you are approved for benefits every week. You still have to recertify every week.
Thank you. Someone wants clarification. Someone with an individual tax identification number can access unemployment benefits even if they didn't receive a stimulus check?
Yes.
Thank you. And then next up, how many weeks do you need to work to be able to qualify?
It can vary by state, but usually the magic number is 26 weeks. But that's over the past 5 quarters. So you have to have worked it, so you don't have to have worked 26 weeks in a clip, in one single clip. It's 26 weeks over the past 5 quarters.
Thank you. I think that'll be, we're getting so many questions about undocumented specifically. Some people are commenting that their understanding was that undocumented people do not qualify for UI benefits, but they're able to get an individual tax identification number for tax purposes. Could you just provide more information on this?
It's not my wheelhouse, but it's my understanding that if you are working and filing for taxes with an ITN and reporting that income to the state and federal government, then you are able to apply for UI benefits. because your employer is paying in for you one way or the other.
Yes. Okay.
We can try to get some clarification from Michelle on that specific topic about
Yes.
undocumented workers, and put that out in the email. And one thing I wanted to comment on, there's been a couple of questions about the amount of time that people work. And one of the things, and this is, again, it's a document that I'll send out with the email that has the recording and other resources, but this is a document that NELT put forward. And the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is emergency assistance to reach workers typically left out of the usual unemployment benefit, it is meant also to cover workers who do not have a long enough work history to qualify for state UI benefits. So they won't qualify for the state UI benefits, but they may qualify for the pandemic unemployment assistance. They may.
Yes. I think, Ellie, if possible, we could stop there. Anyone who has additional questions, please feel free to forward it to us or to our speakers. Or again, we'll try to answer them as we can, but there's so many coming in. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, Ellie.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Casey, for coming on and staying on with us and answering so many of the questions that were coming through. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Bruce.
Thanks so much, everybody. And quick reminder about joining NHRC if you haven't already, or renewing your membership dues. It's very helpful to our work. We'll continue doing the work that we do. And our next call will be a week from now on the 30th. And Ellie, this is a topic on how to manage mortgages and closing loans in the current virtual world. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, good.
We'll have
we'll have
speakers from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and from the National Community Stabilization Trust speaking about it.
All right. And, you know, this is an important issue for all of us. That if you've done a lot of work with your clients and you're trying to get them to close, and what's possible, what's going to happen in the future. I know there's a lot of talk about the credit box and overlays on loan terms to make it a much tighter market. So we'll be very interested in trying to make sure that people who've gotten the pipeline can get through and figure out how to do them in the current environment going forward. Been a bunch of changes around notaries and about e-docs and how all this gets done virtually. And what we'll try to do is talk about the latest understanding. Appraisal will be another issue, but it's, even though you'll have a lot on your plate, keeping home ownership alive during this period of time will be one of the helpful things we can provide. So on that quick note, we'll talk to you again on the 30th, and we'll send out the link for that session soon. Thanks so much, everybody. And you know, people who aren't able to get on, we'll post the recording tomorrow. All right. Thanks, everybody.